that now. Okay, so we should be connected. Let's have a look.
Great. So over to you, Chair Cote, to begin the meeting when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order our Mayor's Council meeting. We're going to start just with an adoption of the agenda. If I can get an adoption of the agenda.
Move adoption.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. I'd like to start the meeting by acknowledging that we are here today, and this meeting is taking place on the unceded and traditional territory of the Halkamilam, Semiahmoo, and Squamish speaking people. These refer to the language groups of the Indigenous people that and many nations who continue to use and work in the areas that TransLink serves, works, and operates. So thank you. Mike, I just want to confirm that the live stream is working and good to go for our public meeting.
It is.
And Carol, I just want to confirm that you've been able to confirm attendance for today's meeting.
I have.
Okay, well, with that, we'll move to item 1.2, which is adoption of our minutes.
Move adoption.
Second.
Okay, the minutes have been moved and seconded, and I don't see any hands, so I will call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, we're moving on to public delegates. We have 3 delegates with us this morning. The first delegate, Mr. Kunzler. So maybe Mike, if you can coordinate our delegate.
For sure. Mr. Kunzler is just joining now. Joe, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Over to you, Chair Cote.
Okay, well, welcome, Joe, and the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always a privilege and honor to address the world famous Mayor's Council. Joe Kunzler here. I have a lot to say within 3 minutes, but I want to start with a point of personal privilege. Namely, I want to thank the staff for facilitating these remote testimonies, both at the world famous Mayor's Council level and in your municipalities, especially in the case of the District of North Vancouver that recently rejected NIMBYism and approved supportive housing. With that, I want to also commend TransLink staff for running Transport 2050 Phase 2. I was impressed with the first Zoom meeting, and as I did there, I want to stress my support for an aggressive low-carbon BRT fleet as the spokes of Network B, with SkyTrain to North Vancouver, and if possible, Port Coquitlam. The fact I really like a certain mayor named Brad West is a factor. Both networks A and B are low emission, and it's really important that we do all we can to reduce carbon emissions. In Network B also spreads more equity and builds on the gritty work and wisdom of one Sarah Ross, who planted political rose bushes in the Annus Horribilis that was 2020. It is also my understanding from the Transport 2050 Reddit yesterday that, quote, all of the street-level rapid transit that's proposed, whether BRT or LRT, includes physically separated lanes that would not be possible for other traffic to drive in. It's really about creating, quote, gold level, end quote, physically separated lanes, end quote. I endorse this concept of transit riders' time mattering and more gold level transit, more places and more often. Now, how do we pay for Network B? Mobility pricing is out. It comes from me, it comes from Minister Bowen, it comes from the Premier. Just up the parking tax because we should charge for parking. There should be no such thing as free parking. But if you park your vehicle on a public road, you pay a tax both to TransLink and the local municipality to help pay for not just transit but also road maintenance for equity. However, I want to conclude on this thought of deep concern. This double vaccinated Yankee is truly frightened for all my TransLink contacts, from you, the mayor, world famous Mayor's Council, to Minister Ma, to the staff and operators and maintainers at TransLink. So I put a good word in for Canada about my fears and you getting vaccines to Congressman Larson, who will report directly back to President Biden. That said, the world famous Mayor's Council needs to pressure the provincial health office and the Premier to prioritize all TransLink employees getting vaccinated promptly. All the Bowenites need to once again defend TransLink like we did last year, so that when this COVID-19 mess is over, hopefully soon, we can get on with defeating climate change with the same courageous cunning TransLink has brought to defeating COVID-19, plus reprioritizing road space to move people, not cars. With equity in mind, let's make it so folks think transit first and look to TransLink with Jada Stevens wayfinding the way to resolving climate change and societal challenges by preferably Network B. Let's just go forth and mobilize and go defeat COVID-19, go defeat climate change. Best of luck. Thanks for being so awesome every single day, TransLink. Thank you. That's a wrap.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, for joining us, and appreciate you making reference to the second round of engagement that we're conducting on Transport 2050. Obviously, this is a really important long-range plan for the region, and we want the public to engage and participate in that process. So appreciate you raising it and participating yourself. So thank you for your comments. We're now going to move
You're quite welcome.
Okay, thank you, Joe. We're now going to move to our next open delegate, Mr. De La Cruz.
Hello there. Hello there, everybody hearing me?
We can. Welcome.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for having me today. I want to start off with a salutation to my South Fraser mayors, if they're here, Mayors McCallum, Mayor Val, Mayor Fareed, Mayor Harvey, and Mayor Walker. I have a lot of dialogue I'd like to start with you and your city staff, but as this meeting was the soonest, I thought I'd start off here. Now, most of what I want to say concerns the outcome of future planning for us south of Fraser cities. A couple of weeks ago, I read that Metro Van is now forecasting that our region will be home to 4 million people by 2050. I want to point this out, but Greater Montreal is also home to about 4 million people today. And I'm sure we're aware of the plans they have to complete a 99-kilometer SkyTrain-style driverless network, rail network by 2029. It's great that we too are in the beginning stages of planning significant expansion, but the process of determining where future transit dollars are directed has me and my organization very concerned. As you might be familiar, my organization, SkyTrain for Surrey, played a role in advocating for the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain. I thought for a while that our activities would stop with the SLS, but we've been reawakened to an extent. An associate messaged me the morning the Transport 2050 consultations came online. Since then, we've come to observe that of the 50 to 100 kilometers of SkyTrain expansion conceptualized, only King George Boulevard to Newton, a 6-kilometer corridor, has been envisioned as a grade separated corridor. Now, I understand that the T2050 team wants to discuss the different transit types and that the routes are extremely conceptual, so they're meant as more of a visual reference than anything final. But the main concern that came up among those in my group is that T2050 could potentially adopt a status quo framework where South of Fraser residents who make considerable tax contribution to TransLink each year get underserved. Today, what I want to ask of the Mayor's Council is if something can be done to ensure that this sort of outcome is prevented. We cannot settle for a plan that once again directs 90% of the grade separated SkyTrain expansion north of the Fraser and leaves 1.2 million South Fraser residents with a network that doesn't give nearly the same opportunity for us to be participants in the regional economy. As part of that, my organization has taken the position that T2050 must include planning for a second sky bridge over the Fraser River on a route that serves downtown Surrey and provides an alternative to the existing Expo Line and Sky Bridge, which could be over capacity by 2050, according to T2050 material. I'm mentioning this specifically to give everybody an idea of where we feel the South of Fraser needs to be in the region's future plan. Whether there's 50 or 100 kilometers of SkyTrain expansion included, we want to see it be more of a 50-50 split between the North and the South. If the last few decades are a sign of anything, it's that ensuring our infrastructure needs aren't met turns into a very costly exercise for everybody. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you very much for joining us, and once again highlighting. It's nice to see that the early engagement on Transport 2050 is getting people thinking. So really appreciate hearing from you. We're now going to move to our final open delegate this morning, Mr. Davidovich.
Nathan, can you hear us? Nathan, I think we've just added you. Can you hear us at all? Nathan, can you hear us? This is the Mayor's Council.
Yeah.
There we go.
You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Welcome. The floor is yours, Nathan.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mayor, and I mean, I presume there's a new councillor there that you didn't announce. the meeting. Could you announce her, please? Hello?
Hello,
Okay.
your time is on, so the floor is yours, Mr. Davidovich.
Yeah, I was just saying that you didn't announce a new counselor at your meeting. You know, but anyhow. Okay, I'm speaking on item 4.1. You know, the last time we discussed that issue was in February 2020. And now you are discussing it at the first time after your closed door meeting, joint meeting with your appointed board, who deferred the 15 more electric buses that were supposed to be in this year to 2023, not to mention that ordering only 57 e-buses instead of 300 e-buses like Toronto by converting the Burnaby Transit Center to e-bus depot, and but then the plans will change, and only the Port Coquitlam Transit Center is going to be done. But what about the approximately 650 buses for handed-out and community shuttle? Nothing is mentioned about that in this report. Those buses usually only last for 5 to 7 years. So we need to convert these buses and build a handed-out garage like they have in Victoria. For over 40 years, handed-out has no garage. You know, how many of you mayors drive gasoline cars? And how many still have gasoline vehicles in your city halls, in your municipality? In New York City, they even have started to have electric garbage trucks. You know, getting with the federal government gas tax of the extra $140 should be used to accelerate buying extra buses. We need 500 buses for BC, 300 for TransLink, and 200 for BC Transit. So that's what that money should be used, and you should co-share it with the provincial government to get going. You know, that's what they could do right away, buy extra buses. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us this morning, Nathan, and we will be talking a little bit more about our low carbon fleet strategy on the agenda today. So appreciate you joining us. So that brings us to the end of our open delegations. Thank you to all of the delegates for joining the Mayor's Council this morning. We're now going to move on to section number 3 of the agenda. The first item is the federal and provincial budget update from our executive director, and I'd like to pass this off to Mike Buda.
Sure, thank you, Chair. We sent a report around with the revised agenda the other day. It's simply a compendium of information. I think you know that we've shared privately by email as these budgets were released, but I wanted to put it all together in one report, in part so that your staff and councils might be able to benefit from the intelligence. Just want to make a couple of comments because the report's in front of you. I think the first is, and sometimes we forget about kind of taking a longer look back at federal and provincial investments in our transit system, but from 2016 until this year, we've benefited from almost just over $6 billion in senior government investments, mostly in capital, but also for a relief operating funding that was last year to help us through the pandemic. That is by far and away over a 5 or 6 year period, multiple times more than any previous period. And importantly, most of that funding has come by way of long-term commitments designed to support our long-term plans rather than the previous or the pattern in earlier times where funding was really allocated for one-off projects, one at a time. That made long-term planning very difficult. So I think as background, that's important to know. I'll talk maybe about federal funding and the budget first, and then the provincial budget very briefly. I think that the one thing before I talk about the federal budget to emphasize is we're currently the recipients of about $2.5 billion from the federal government through the existing Investing in Canadian Infrastructure program, ICIP. And that was a 10-year program announced originally in 2017, goes through until 2026. And we've actually already allocated over 95% of our funding from that wider national $20 billion envelope, much more than most other, or maybe any other major transit agency in Canada, which is good news. It allows us to get that, turn those investments into projects, that are going to benefit the region very quickly. It's difficult because, of course, we still have projects that require funding in the phase 2 and phase 2 update plans, including Surrey Langley SkyTrain. And then just speaking quickly on provincial funding, as you know, the provincial government has committed a 40% share of all projects in the vision. Again, this is supporting long-term planning. Going into these federal and provincial budgets, we had 3 objectives. One is to secure additional recovery and rebuilding funding to help us recover from this pandemic. The second is additional capital funding in the shorter term, in the next 4 or 5 years, to allow us to complete the remaining projects in the phase 2 and phase 2 update plans, in particular stage 2 of Surrey Langley SkyTrain, the low carbon fleet strategy, and project studies to support future planning. And then for many years, we've been calling for a permanent transit fund. The existing federal transit infrastructure program is already fairly long-term, which has enabled us to proceed with our own long-term plans with more certainty. But a permanent transit fund would actually allow us to really match up, in this case, federal funding with the kind of long-term planning environment that we're working on with Transport 2050. So those are the 3 objectives we had. Very quickly, and you'll see this in the report, the federal budget actually delivered on all but the first one around pandemic relief funding. The federal budget committed to bringing in a permanent transit fund earlier than we anticipated, and it provided shorter-term stimulus transit funding between now and when the permanent transit fund starts, which is going to allow us to move ahead as aggressively as possible with the low-carbon fleet strategy. There's a report on that shortly. It provides funding for active transportation, and as we've reported to you before, the cost-shared transit funding for municipal and regional active transportation projects is well oversubscribed. So this is going to be an important opportunity. And then importantly, it includes a big envelope for what might be termed shovel-ready or stimulus transit, major transit funding projects, for projects like SLS Stage 2. So we think there's an opportunity there. And then finally, and this was announced before the budget as well, the gas tax fund has been doubled for this year, just a one-time doubling. So that's an additional $140 million. That's information we'll be able to bring back to you at a future meeting as to how we'll be able to allocate that. So the federal budget was very significant for transit and for TransLink in Metro Vancouver. The permanent transit fund is going to really enable us to transform how we think about longer-term planning, especially as we move into updating the 10-year vision. As I said, the one thing the federal budget missed from our set of objectives was an extension to the Safe Restart Agreement funding to support us through the next few years of pandemic recovery. This is work that we're obviously going to have to continue. Shifting to the provincial government and the provincial budget, fortunately, this is something the province obviously is absolutely committed to. We have an MOU with the province that stipulates how we're going to work together over the next several years to come up with a long-term strategy to recover and our finances and put us back on sort of long-term financial sustainability. That'll be the venue we really work through to secure a path forward on pandemic recovery. As you know, also the provincial budget made a commitment to making transit free for youth under 12. That's already been announced. And we'll see more details coming out soon, but that's slated to start as soon as September. And again, we'll bring more information on implementation plans back to you. And then the budget also made a commitment to completing Surrey Langley SkyTrain all the way to Langley. The budget itself made sure there's funding for planning. And then, as you see in the report, the Minister of Finance was pretty clear that she has put the resources needed into this budget to ensure that when the project is ready for final commitments, that there's budget room there, which is obviously really positive. So in all, we think that these two budgets allow us to keep going down the path we've set out for us, actually all the way back in in October with our mandate renewal to complete the remaining projects that have not yet received funding from the existing and already approved phase 2 and the phase 2 plan of the 10-year vision and the phase 2 uptake plan. And it's going to allow us to give us the long-term funding certainty we need to keep planning into Transport 2050 and the 10-year vision. And then we have a process in place with the province to keep working on the all-important recovery of our pandemic-related financial losses. So with that, Mr. Chair, happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you for the report and the update. I'll open it up. Is there any questions or comments from the Mayor's Council? Seeing no hands, maybe I'll just look for a motion to receive the report.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 It's carried. Okay, moving on to item 4.1, the low carbon fleet strategy implementation, and I'm going to pass it to Jeff Cross to do a short presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously there's been several mentions of this. What we want to do today is actually put forward a request for an endorsement to basically bake in our low carbon fleet strategy as our bus fleet and facilities plan going forward. There's been a lot of progress both on the development of the technology, our planning internally, and on the funding, as Mike pointed to. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background context. The Metro Vancouver has fairly aggressive goals and targets around GHG reduction, pegging back against 2007 levels. In 2018, at the request of Metro Vancouver, we looked at our own emissions profile for all of our fleet and facilities, and the board adopted the targets that you see there for 2050. Whereby we would try and get to at least an 80% reduction in our greenhouse gases and use 100% renewable across the enterprise. We developed 3 different paths to do so that were really around the trajectory and how quickly we move on that, from a cautious to sort of a more of a progressive, and then to the aggressive, which would be moving as quickly as possible expediently. So in February 2020, we brought this forward to the Mayor's Council. Your request of us was to proceed on the aggressive path, at least on the first steps of that, recognizing that all of the incremental funding that would be required upfront for capital was not yet clear, and so that we would take it step by step. And that is what we've done. So now we're looking to see if we can actually decide that this situation is such that we can just bake this in going forward. Next slide. So we have been working on pilots. We have the Route 100 that's been going with 4 buses. We are at now have 15 more that will be coming online to make that route fully electric. It gives us an opportunity to try and standardize the charging system for that, using 2 different types of buses, to understand what the operations and maintenance considerations should be, and to really get some experience as we think about how to best integrate this into our system. We have, looking ahead, already approved the first round of replacement buses that would need to be here by 2023 per our schedule, and I'll go over the schedule in a second, and that was approved by Metro Vancouver earlier this year, so that's 57. And at the same time, we are planning for our first fully electric transit center that would be in South Vancouver, the new Marpole Transit Center, scheduled for to come online in 2025. Next slide, please. So the key thing for us is how quickly to move is per the replacement schedule for our existing vehicles. As you know, for conventional vehicles, which are our 40-foot and 60-foot vehicles that you see out on the road, the vast majority of our fleet, they last somewhere between 15 and 17 years. So from both a cost perspective and a GHG perspective, given the embodied energy, we want to be using those to their maximum extent. You see on the left the schedule of when those are intended to be retired, when they would have come to the end of their useful life. And the vast majority, close to 600 of those would be, or a little bit over 500, are over the course of the next 5 years. So if you endorse this going forward, we would be replacing all 600 of those with battery electric buses, and including both depot and en route charging. We would need some additional vehicles just because of the way the operations work for charging and more spares. So we would be looking at about 677 additional battery electric buses per our current plans. This doesn't include any future expansion that may come online. And as you're aware, we already operate a very large fleet of electric trolleys in Vancouver. So as such, we would have a very significant progress on this. Next slide. On the funding situation, Mike gave you a bit of a detailed overview on how things have changed over the course of the last year. One of the key things I want to raise is that the stimulus funding of $5.9 billion that the federal government announced and put into the budget includes this $2.75 billion for bus electrification across Canada, with the goal of getting 4,000 to 5,000 zero emission buses underway in the next few years. So that was a key pivotal moment for us to be able to access that. We heavily rely on the federal gas tax transfer, which goes through Metro Vancouver and has been allocated to TransLink over the last decade or more. That was also topped up as part of the announcement in the budget by an additional $140 million, which gives us additional funds going forward. The province has also announced within their budgets different programs by which to accelerate the acceleration of both infrastructure, building technology, and fleet, and that was part of their election promise back in 2020. So the complexion of the funding situation has changed considerably, that we feel that the $640 million in incremental costs over the next 10 years of electrifying the fleet can be absorbed through these different programs. Next slide. So this would allow us to hit, from an internal perspective, both the 2030 and the 2050 targets, in fact, exceed the 2050 targets, hitting 90%. The 2030 target is the most difficult for many agencies. We would hit right about 45% if we go forward at this time with replacing all of our conventional buses with electric as they come up on their retirement age. What we are also starting to do is to get a better handle on what the operational and maintenance cost assumptions would be going forward. We know that fuel is one of our biggest cost elements, and obviously the reduction from going away from diesel fuel to electricity, which is much cheaper in this province and much cleaner, will have very significant savings. We're also starting to get a better handle on what the maintenance may be as well. So we would include this in our investment plan, so you can see that there would be quite significant operational savings that start to really ratchet up starting in about 2025 or 2026. It looks like at this point that the life cycle costs for battery electric buses are about neutral to positive, let alone the emissions profile compared to diesel hybrids at this point. So we're really at a turning point. Next slide. So finally, this is the recommendation to the Mayor's Council. We've heard from you over repeated times as we've been looking at incremental decisions around the low carbon fleet strategy to make sure that we go forward and pursue this. It's supported by the provincial and federal direction around targets and obviously where their policy imperatives are in what they're funding. So at this time, management feels comfortable in recommending that we should go forward with the aggressive path and make that our bus fleet and facilities program going forward. I will say it's been raised before about other buses. So we have smaller vehicles that are replaced on a more regular cycle, 5 to 7 years, whether it be our community shuttles or our handy dart vehicles. Those are things that we're continuing to look at, and that would be part of the implementation plan that we'll come back to you with. Clearly, we want to get to electrifying those at a reasonable timeline. Actually, the technology in the field has progressed more on the conventional bus side as far as the market penetration and availability, and there are other issues, but we do feel we will be able to handle that in the coming decade or so. So we will come back to the board and then to the Mayor's Council with a full implementation path. With that, Chair, I'm open to take any questions. With me also is Dom Repta, who is the Acting Director of Sustainability that's helped lead a lot of this technical work, and Jeff Busby, our Acting VP of IME. So if there are technical questions, they can help me out.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jeff. So we'll open up the floor now. Mayor Little.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And you know, there's a lot of exciting technology that can be achieved through a program like this. I'm not challenging, okay, what I am saying here is the prime directive of TransLink should be to reduce the overall greenhouse gases by moving people into the transit system throughout our region. It should not be as a priority to green up our own operations at the net loss to the regional airshed. This is $640 million program that won't move a single person out of a car and into the transit service. We repeat that. It's a $640 million program that won't move a single person out of their car. So I understand that there's a prerogative and pressure from our partners to green up the operations of TransLink, but our first priority should be to move people out of their cars. This program will not improve the availability of the service, and it will not move people out of their cars and into the transit service. So I'm not supportive of this as the prime strategy going forward for TransLink.
Thank you very much. Director McCutcheon.
Thank you, and Jeff, thank you for that comprehensive report. I'm in full support of this. I think that the message it sends, if we were to start buying any buses in 2021, 2023, 2025, that are diesel or hybrid, is we can't be doing that. We have to. It has to be both. It can't be buying diesel buses and then also, trying to get people. We have to get the diesel buses off the road, and we need to be getting people out of their cars. My question for you, Jeff, you addressed it partly at the end, was around those other shuttle buses and handy dart and also support vehicles. I presume then we will be moving more towards those. I'm specifically wondering about the support vehicles. Are we looking at those as well, or are they already electric?
Good question, Director McCutcheon. No, they're primarily not electric, though we do have some hybrid. So we're looking at what we call our non-revenue vehicles. So those are service vehicles for maintaining or moving staff around, et cetera. The biggest chunk would be the handy dart vehicles in the community shuttle. Right now, it's not commercially available at scale for production vehicles that are fully battery electric bus. There are battery electric. There are other considerations as well, because we have them dispersed across a lot of different depots in the region. In some cases, we're leasing property, et cetera. So there are some other elements that we would need to consider as far as the prioritization of that. In addition, looking at the targets that we're trying to achieve, both the 2030 and the 2050, those tend to be, they're gasoline vehicles. They have lower emissions. They are smaller vehicles. They are not the largest part of the actual fleet emissions. That's not to say we won't look at them, but this is the bigger piece of the pie, is the conventional first.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Walker.
Thanks very much, Chair Cote, and thanks for the report, Jeff. I agree with the Councillor, Director McCutcheon. This is something we need to do, and we need to move on it fairly aggressively. So I have two questions, actually. Is there a difference in the cost between cautious, progressive, and aggressive? And number two, the buses themselves and the batteries that they run on, are there two different sets of lifetimes for those? In other words, do the buses outlast the batteries, and what will that look like down the road?
So maybe I'll take the first and turn the second over to Dom to talk about the technology at this point and how it's evolving. There are different cost profiles from the upfront capital costs, and those are starting to be offset by the operational savings that you saw that we had estimated over the course of the next 10 years. And so the net we would have to figure out between those different elements. I think per Mayor Little's sort of question too about the allocation of funding, previously staff had been identifying that there would be a trade-off given the capital funding available between using that capital funding for expansion vehicles or the regional share of that towards other services that we could be putting out there versus the electrification of the fleet. What we're seeing now is our dedicated revenue sources, capital programs from the federal government and from the provincial government that could only be allocated to the electrification. And as such, we do not see the differential necessarily coming forward between either the 3 paths or between our options as far as expanding our services or electrifying. We see that those two things could happen concurrently without a significant fiscal impact to the region, recognizing that the province and the federal government are allocating those. Maybe Dom, can you talk about the sort of battery technology?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me. So yeah, the question about the battery life versus the bus life, there will be a battery changeover for sure. Now our buses, we expect to operate 17 years, the battery buses, just as our existing diesel buses. In our modeling and in our cost analysis, we have put in 2 battery exchanges. Now it's pretty new technology. It may be that the battery degrades only where we need to replace it once, but we've been pretty conservative in our modeling, and we put 2 battery changes. So we estimate a battery, changeover around 7 years, 6 to 8 years, somewhere in there. And actually, what we're seeing though is some bus manufacturers are already putting the cost of one changeover into the overall cost of the upfront cost of the bus, which is what we've essentially done too when we've done our modeling, our full life cycle modeling, putting in 2 battery changes. So good question, but when the battery is changed over, there still will be expected 70 to 80% capacity of that battery. And then there will be a second life for those batteries. So it might be battery storage, it could be resale. It's not like we're done with them and they end up in a landfill. So there should be, there might even be some chances to regain some revenue from those batteries in a second life.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Mayor Buchanan.
Thank you very much, Chair Cote, and thank you, Mr. Cross, for your presentation. I do support this. I think this plan does allow us to transition the fleet, and this should be a priority of ours as we're moving forward. 2 questions. Jeff, on one of your slides, it talked about the GHG benefits and where we'd be at 2030 and then 2050. I'm just curious if those targets, meeting those targets is with the electrification of the fleet only, or is that taking into account potentially mobility pricing as a tool? And then my second question is, I'd be interested to hear TransLink's plan for deployment of the fleets in terms of the criteria being used. Will we be deploying in areas that have higher density, have put the land use in, have higher numbers of residents living? Because I do think, obviously these buses are going to be quieter, there's going to be better air quality, and which is important obviously anywhere, but I think if we're looking at higher density, that the benefits of electrification of the fleet works with the land use that municipalities have put in place. So I'd be interested in the plan for deployment.
Thank you, Mayor Buchanan. So on the first piece, it's really important to note that these are just I shouldn't say just, this is important. These are our own emissions from our own fleet and infrastructure. They're not related to the overall transportation sector within the region. So which is work that we're doing through Transport 2050, and we had done in the Mayor's vision, is to understand both from our own emissions and then what's happening with the overall private fleet within the region, and then the amount of driving on what our profile will look like. Hitting that 2030 target is going to be much more difficult at the transportation regional scale than with our own emissions, just because of the adoption of electric vehicles at the regional scale is a little bit slower, as well as the amount of driving that's happening. So we will be able to report back to you on that, on what the progress looks like, but it will be slower. On the second piece, so we will come forward with an implementation plan. It's informed by a number of issues, both where those buses can go into service, and maybe Dom can speak to some of the analysis that we've done. We recognize that obviously emissions are at a regional scale and it's important, but there are some byproduct benefits around sound, et cetera, and emissions that we are looking at. Dom, do you want to speak to the analysis that was done?
Sure, yeah. So as far as the analysis, it was pretty much a technical analysis. And to be honest, we didn't really factor in like social and social equity issues and some of the kind of higher density issues. However, saying that, our plan has been generally based upon the opportunity of a new transit center being Marpole Transit Center. So that was an obvious step for us to take, was let's build it from the get-go to be battery electric supporting. And then the routes from there, we analyze the routes, and then we'll decide which kind of battery technology is best suited to that depot. And then from there, looking just at the 10-year outlook, we looked at, again, what are the really good opportunities kind of in our planning of depot upgrades and depot design. And then we looked at, again, at more the technical analysis of what are the routes out of some of these depots. It was almost like a easy, medium, hard scale we did about based on current technology. And then we looked at all of our different transit centers and what would be the best in the next decade. So that's when we came up with something like Port Coquitlam and Burnaby Transit Center. There's some planned work. The technology suits those transit centers really well right now. Some of the other transit centers have a bit more demanding technology or a bit more demanding energy usage. So it really was like an energy, time out in service, battery capabilities, pretty technical, not looking at we have to do these routes because there's higher density. Now we might think of those and put those in consideration in the future, but again, as our first step in new technology, was really trying to be kind of science-based and technology driven.
Okay, can I just comment to that, Mayor Cote?
For sure.
So thank you for that. And I appreciate in the first 10 years that, you know, we're starting this and we need to be looking at that technical piece and where does it make sense and where are we putting, you know, new depots and that infrastructure that's going to work and support this. But I would highly suggest that we do look at that social equity piece and that we start to look at you know, as you know, this isn't something that we're just doing for 10 years. We're going to be moving this along. And so I do really think we have to start looking at, you know, where we are putting that land use and transportation planning obviously together, which we wanted to be doing, but higher density. And, you know, more and more people are speaking to us as elected officials around noise, air emissions within our more compact urban areas. And so I think that needs to be a consideration moving forward.
Yeah, noted. Actually, you are right. In a recent funding application we've been working through and submitted, there were some questions on social equity of some of the routes that have been chosen for our Port Coquitlam Transit Center. So it's something that is definitely on our radar now, and we're working internally on if all things being equal, will that be another factor now? So it is an important issue and noted.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Upton.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Hurley.
Well, thank you, and I'm in full support of the aggressive approach, and I would even supercharge that some more if possible. But you know, I don't see this as our only strategy and as our only primary goal going forward to get people out of their cars. So I just think it's so important for the GHGs and for the quietness for our communities as well that this is going to produce. My concern is more around the handy dart fleet and our aggressiveness there. And, you know, I'm not so sure that there's not technology out there that we can use at this time and those fleets aren't available to us. So I would really like to ensure that we're carrying this aggressiveness through to that fleet as well, to make sure we're on top of new opportunities that I believe are out there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Hurley. Councillor Cameron.
Yeah, I have to credit Mayor Hurley for changing the direction of the conversation at the Mayor's Council for this. I remember the meeting a couple of years ago when we were talking about bus purchasing, and Mayor Hurley made the point back then that what are we doing buying 600 diesel or diesel hybrid buses, you know, and locking in emissions for the next 17 years after we take delivery. And, you know, I think that sparked the conversation. I think we all realized he was right. And so here we are, and this is the result of that. So, you know, thanks to him, I think a couple points I want to make that have been made already, but just to highlight them, the graph that Mr. Cross showed about the difference between the two more aggressive strategies really shows that it's actually, you can gloss over it, but if you take the 100,000 megatons number and you look at the difference between progressive and aggressive, I mean, progressive sounds good and so does aggressive. What's the difference? Well, if you look at the x-axis, you'll notice that the difference at 100,000 megatons is about 10 years. That's a decade. So we're a decade faster with the aggressive approach. It's not even really close. So the axes, the way they're calibrated, is no criticism of the person who made this graph, obscure the fact that there's a humongous difference for the next 10, 15 years between these two approaches. It's not even they're not even nearly the same thing. So there's that piece. There's the second piece, which Mr. Cross mentioned, but I'll highlight, is we're not going to get federal and provincial money, as much money to expand the system as we are to go low carbon because of the commitments federally and provincially to GHG targets. The federal and provincial governments have signaled that they're actually wanting to meet the targets rather than just set them. And we have targets and we have to take the same approach. So if they're going to make more money available to actually meet targets, then this isn't $600 million of money we could be spending elsewhere. This is $600 million that can only be spent towards initiatives like this. So use it or lose it. The other point is, Mayor Little raised a significant point, which is $600 million. Could we use it more efficiently elsewhere to achieve greater reductions? Well, because of what I just said, probably not. But the other point to make that we should highlight is that $100 million a year in operational savings, which I think is conservative given the price of gas is only likely to increase. $100 million means that the $600 million that we're paying will be recouped in a very short period of time. And depending on how you do the amortization, certainly less than 10 years. So what we're really talking here is not about $600 million additionally. We're just talking about an upfront cost versus a spread out cost. So we're going to save the money. And then the last thing, we're going to spend the money anyway, is my point. And the last thing is that and Mayor Buchanan mentioned this, and it should be highlighted. The Health and Community Design Lab at UBC has done some incredible work showing the health effects of living next to traffic. And the fact is, if you live within X number of meters from a major transportation corridor, you have significantly higher health impacts across a number of indicia. Basically, it's unhealthy to live next to a bunch of cars spewing exhaust. Our development patterns in the region, transit-oriented development, put most of our density next to those very same transportation corridors. So the faster we can electrify and get rid of those emissions, both in single occupancy vehicles by mode shifting and by cleaning up our own act in our buses, we're going to be saving lives. Like, this isn't some sort of academic possibility. This is a full-on reality that the cleaner we can make our vehicles, the fewer people will have health-related impacts and die because of emissions, because of pollution. So I'm 100% supportive of this. I thank Mayor Hurley for changing the direction. I congratulate staff for being able to pivot, and I'm appreciative of the federal and provincial governments for tying the funding to this clean energy. Whenever I talk to my MLAs or my MP, they can't give us money fast enough for stuff like electrification. It really ticks off so many boxes. And they put their money where their mouth is. We've asked for this money. We've got it. Let's spend it.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Mayor Dingwall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try and be really succinct. I fully support the aggressive approach. Busing has and is a staple for us and is the backbone of transit essentially around the world. It also addresses climate change and the environment. It matches senior government priorities and funding opportunities, as has already been mentioned. The second thing, though, and I've said this on a good number of occasions, I also support a next generation rapid bus and investment in that, which then matches all the things that I just said previously. So I'm hoping Transit does take an aggressive approach with the acquisition of buses, but also next gen bus rapid transit. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Dingwall. Mayor Ross.
Thank you very much. Want to thank staff for bringing this report forward. And it seems pretty clear that we can take advantage of this funding opportunity, or we in fact see it go elsewhere and our tax dollars work in another part of the country. I think this is a pretty pivotal moment when we look at the 17-year life of a diesel bus, that there's other costs that get brought up. And those are the environmental costs, and people preceding have spoken with real conviction and real details. So I won't go into that a lot, but I think there's a cost that will come up that will be around what we do today in terms of the next 17 years. And we know things are changing rapidly. We know things are changing around the environment. And so if we choose to not go after this aggressive strategy that supports the environment, then forever, for 17 years, there's going to be questions about why we did not do this. I just think it's critical, and it's critical on an environmental piece. And I'd like to, being a new person on this council, or I'd like to thank the people have alluded to, Mayor Hurley and others. And I think this is a way to go. I will be in full support of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Ross, and appreciate all the comments from my colleagues and the staff presentation. I think this has been a number of meetings and decisions in the works. I think February 2020 was a really important direction that came from the Mayor's Council adopting the aggressive approach. But I think today is actually another really important decision, because what we're deciding today is actually embedding that in the financial models there, which I think is the critical step, as this becomes the baseline of how we operate and how we move forward with our infrastructure and bus replacement policies there. So from my perspective, I think this is a direction we have to go and need to move forward with. I think we all recognize the climate emergency that we face and the need to take strong and fast action. And I think the reality is, if we're not going to be leaders in this regard, well, then who is? And I think we need to be in that place. I think to Mayor Little's point, I think it is a good point that reducing greenhouse gas emissions related to transportation is a lot more than just electrifying buses. There is significant gains to be made about shifting people out of automobiles and into public transit, and that has to be an important focus there. But I don't want to create a situation where we've got a forced conflict between those two things. I think in a climate emergency, these both have to be priorities, and these things that we need to work our way through there. So certainly very, very supportive of the direction and embedding this in the work we do. I think the other reality that we've mentioned on the practical front too is the work we do is in partnerships with the provincial and federal governments. It's also in partnership with Metro Vancouver, and we've gotten strong signals from all of those partners that this is an absolute must, particularly when we're looking for funding partnerships from those bodies there. So to me, I think it's the certainly right direction to make, and I think this is the next important decision point in the work that we've been pushing forward with the low carbon fleet strategy. So with that, there is a recommendation that is in this report, and I will look to the Mayor's Council if they'd like to move that forward.
So moved. Second.
Okay, the recommendation has been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And it's carried. Okay, thanks very much. We'll now move on to item 5.1 on the agenda, which is an overview of the Transport 2050 Phase 2 public engagement. And here I'm going to pass it off to Andrew McCurran to give us a quick update.
Great, thank you, Chair. As you know, you mentioned earlier, the second of 3 phases of engagement of Transport 2050 is now underway. We launched phase 2 on April 19th. It's going to run through till May 14th. And in your agenda package for this item, we've included the discussion guide that we put out there to support the discussion, as well as 3 technical backgrounders. I'll take just a few minutes to highlight, to walk through the key questions that we're asking the public and draw your attention to the discussion guide materials, just so that everyone's aware of what is out there right now. So the first part is really around goals. In phase 1, we asked the public to share their values, their concerns, their priorities, their vision for the future. And we translated what we heard into 5 draft goals. So on page 22 of your agenda package in the discussion guide, we've got them listed there. It's really around making sure that in the future, we all have convenient choices, reliable choices, affordable choices, safe and comfortable choices, and carbon-free choices. We're asking the public in this round if we're on the right track with these goals before we come back in the fall to consult with them on more detailed targets that we're in the process of working with you on right now. We're also in the fall going to be bringing back a full draft of the full strategy that'll include a more comprehensive list of strategies and actions. But in phase 2, we're focusing on 3 particularly transformative actions that we heard support for in that first round of engagement. On page 25 of your agenda package is the first of those. It's around people first streets. And the proposal is around making walking, biking, and rolling safer and more comfortable, really by rethinking how we design our streets, reducing traffic speeds and repurposing street space. So we're asking the public for their level of support for that kind of those kind of actions. On page 27 of your agenda package, the discussion guide discusses the third action is actually around managing the arrival of automated vehicles. We know there's a lot of potential to improve access and reduce collisions, improve safety with AVs, but there's also some risk and some downside with respect to increasing the levels of driving and traffic and congestion, especially around the increase of zero occupant trips. So we're asking the public in this phase around their support for different measures that we might use to discourage that automation fueled congestion, such as car sharing and fees to discourage zero occupant trips. And then the other question we're focusing on in this round of engagement, and you heard a few of the speakers already speak to this morning in the public delegations, page 26 of your agenda package asks, how should we expand the rapid transit network? So we put forward 2 illustrative networks. Really, these are meant to be conceptual, illustrating 2 different approaches. And the different approaches are really framed around different proportions of 2 different types of rapid transit. The first is street level rapid transit running in dedicated lanes. And the second is grade separated or rapid transit running in guideways or tunnels. It's above or below the street. The key thing I want to emphasize here is that both of these types of rapid transit offer fast, frequent, reliable service. They're pretty comparable in that respect. But where we anticipate higher, particularly high ridership volumes, we think that above or below grade rapid transit would be needed to handle that higher capacity because of its ability to run longer vehicles. The challenge is that type of rapid transit costs 5 times more to build than street level rapid transit. So network A, you can see on page 26, puts more emphasis on grade separated rapid transit or above and below street level. And so as a result, it's got some higher capacity on a fewer number of corridors. So it's going to reach fewer neighborhoods by 2050. In total, network A adds about 200 more kilometers of rapid transit to the network. Network B puts a bit more emphasis on street level rapid transit. So the idea there is it will reach relatively more neighborhoods by 2050. It's adding 400 more kilometers of rapid transit to the network. But the key trade-off there is that it would require the conversion of some existing road space to exclusive use by transit. So those are the key trade-offs, the key things we're looking for feedback from the public in phase 2. Since the launch in mid-April, we've been running a series of public open houses, some more focused stakeholder workshops. But really the key thing that we're inviting the public to do is go to transport2050.ca and fill out the survey. There's a couple explainer videos in the survey as well that help describe everything I just went through in more detail. We'll report back to you after the engagement closes in mid-May. Back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. So we'll open it up. Mayor Walker.
Thanks very much, Chair Cote, and thanks, Andrew, for the presentation. So my question is, you suggested that using road corridors would be problematic. In essence, it would pit whatever our transit system would look like against private vehicles, I'm assuming, perhaps other vehicles as well. It frankly seems to me that the intent is to get vehicles off the road to the largest degree possible, and also make transit the main I guess, process of getting people around. So I think that's something that I could support. But I want to go back to, and I think I got this correct, the difference between A and B would be longer vehicles on A, which would be above or below ground. Would that also translate that B would give more frequency of vehicles, and therefore the ability to change and move people as required would be more flexible?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Walker. It's a good question. Really, A would allow, grade separated. There's actually grade separated and street level in both networks. So just wanted to emphasize that. You can see in the discussion guide that Network A has 100 kilometers of grade separated and 100 kilometers of street level, and Network B has 50 kilometers of grade separated. And because there's 50 fewer kilometers of grade separated, that additional dollars are able to be reinvested in more kilometers of street level, so that there's 350 kilometers of street level in Network B. So they show up in both. But to your question about frequency, we think that we would be able to run comparable frequencies on both street level and grade separated, but there would be even more frequency capable on grade separated. So it's a combination of longer vehicles, and a bit more frequency allows for higher capacity on grade separated rapid transit when compared to street level.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Brody.
Mr. Chair, through you to staff, there was a public notification recently about the Millennium Line UBC extension and a consultation on that. And I'm just wondering how that fits in with this public engagements on T2050.
I can take that,
Did you want
Chair.
to take that?
Yeah, for sure. Per the direction of the board and the Mayor's Council to undertake that study, Mayor Brody, the consultation is really on the objectives and the alignment options that we're looking at to advance that, and to make sure that the public is aware about that work and what the potential benefits of that project and costs could be going forward, and to make sure that we understand what their considerations and concerns are. We, per the direction of this body, nested the two together, recognizing that part of the work around UBC extension is to better understand what the performance of that would be, and thus be able to see how it fits within the network for Transport 2050, and what the priorities of the Mayor's Council, the board, and the province will be. So as you saw in both those networks, it has been identified for quite some time, since actually Transport 2021, to make that connection to UBC. So we provide that within the Transport 2050 network options. We also gave some analysis just on the potential ridership for those different networks. And then if somebody is interested in the UBC extension engagement to understand the particulars of what's being considered, they can dive in. So the two things are very dovetailed at this point.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think that we have to be very careful about this, because we have not gotten the funding and what's necessary for the stage 2 or the second phase of the mayor's plan, much less phase 3. And I think that what this is doing, and I've been saying this for a while, and it came up a while ago, we're putting false hope into the minds of the public, not to mention the various stakeholders that are interested in the UBC line. We've got so many priorities to accomplish here that I think that it's a big mistake to go having this kind of consultation on one particular line. I think it's unprecedented. What are you having a a consultation on going over to the North Shore? Are you having a consultation about going further to the Northeast sector or south? I don't think so. And so what we're doing is we're confusing the public, and it's going to slowly build to a momentum. And then we've got a further problem. We know that certain parties are reaching out to the various levels of government to get funding for this. And I think that it's well ahead of its time, and we are making a big mistake in that regard.
I appreciate your comments, Mayor Brody. As per our discussions around this table last year, as we all know, there is some study work being done on that corridor that has been funded and is undergoing. The Mayor's Council did talk about how to engage the public. The past decision of this body was to actually engage this in the longer range planning, given that it is a longer range plan that doesn't currently fit in the existing mayor's 10-year plan. So that's why it's happening the way it is there. And from my recollection, it is consistent with our past decisions around this table.
And I appreciate that, but I'd also remind the group and staff that part of phase 2 talks about various bus routes which have been postponed. Now, we could far more easily use the money for this consultation on those bus routes. Let's get them up and operating. And the shovel is not even in the ground on Broadway. Why are we consulting on something that is many years at best out? So I think that it's, we're misplacing the emphasis, and we need to get back to basics and not be confusing the public with a dream that is well into the future.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move along on the speaking list. Mayor Buchanan.
Thank you very much. And I would just add to Mayor Brody's comments in that, this was a point of conversation at the planning table. And I think, the agreement was the direction that's happening. But I think the other part of that resolution that was passed was that the information obtained in that consultation would come back and be considered with every other thing that we are doing. And so I think that point needs to be very, very clear to the public that, yes, it's important and we need to look at the alignment, but it is, not advancing ahead of other things. We have those conversations to still be had, and that that information will be part of the much bigger evaluation and decision making at this table. So that is very clear. So there is no confusion with the public. I think we need to make that very clear. That wasn't my question. I do have a question in regards to this. That was just my comment. In regards to Transport 2050, I like the discussion guide that we were given and the direction staff are going out with the public on. I am curious to know and interested in how we're going to be using what we're hearing through this engagement and coordinating that with the ongoing regional growth strategy through Metro Vancouver. So how are we tying this into our own planning, but also using it for the regional growth strategy?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Thanks, Mayor Buchanan. So we will take the findings from phase 2 engagement, especially I think as it relates to the network expansion, as that has probably the strongest linkages to the growth strategy, feeding them back to you through the spring. And as we land on a preferred network this summer with you, to bring back out to the public for consultation in our third and final round of consultation, phase 3 in the fall. Simultaneously, we at a staff level are having really tight coordination with Metro Vancouver and the Metro 2050 team. And so we are, as they are developing the Metro 2050 document and some of the growth concepts that they're working through the Metro Board and the Metro Planning Committee, we're actively in coordination with them, in particular around the rapid transit network lines. So that any proposals that both of us are bringing forward have really been there's strong alignment there at the staff level. So some of the work that we'll be doing with you both, I think, at the Metro Board table and at the Mayor's Council table through the spring and summer, I think we'll start to see both of those documents be brought together so that you can consider them at the same time. So that's our hope.
Okay, so sorry, can I just do a follow-up to that, Mayor Cote?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for that. So just in terms of, so what I heard was looking at major transit corridors, but I do think we really need to make sure, again, so there's no confusion with the public, that, these are documents that are regional wide. And so when we're looking at, targets for housing and frequent corridors and parking, there's a number of overlapping issues, not just the transportation piece. And so we really need to make sure that that those documents are speaking the same thing and not contradicting one another.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Yeah.
I think that's a good point, Mayor Buchanan. And I know both the housing and transportation goals are coming to the Metro Regional Planning Committee next week, but will ultimately coming to the Metro Board at the end of May. And at least the discussions I've had with Metro staff is there's a lot of conversations happening between these two works, because obviously both of those, particularly those two Metro goals and Metro 2050, have to be strongly aligned and connected to the work that we're doing and the conversations we're having here. I also, to your earlier point, I think it is a good point. We know our priority right now is the existing mayor's 10-year plan and working through the challenges we do have, but we are contemplating looking at a refresh and what's next beyond the existing mayor's 10-year plan, where we can talk about future priorities in the region. And maybe Jeff Cross, I'm wondering if you can just provide the Mayor's Council just an update with some thinking and timing about how those conversations will evolve as Transport 2050 starts to come to its the later stages.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Jeff, before you go, can I just make a point or ask, just in terms of, understanding that Metro staff and TransLink staff are working together, but what is the level of involvement with each of our local staff, in the sense of, making sure that they're really on board with the numbers and the targets that we're looking at, because many municipalities are currently in process of looking at reviewing or updating their OCP or area plans. And so it's really important that, all these levels of people are aligned. And again, so that we're very clear on where we want to be seeing the region go by 2050.
Thank you, Mayor Buchanan, for that clarification. So we are maintaining a regional agency advisory group that it's constituted of municipalities and larger agencies, and includes both the transportation and the planning staff. So there's quite an overlap between also the Regional Planning Advisory Committee that Metro contains, and they have their own task force as well. And we're making sure that we're using both of those groups, that they can see that the two strategies, as they come together and as they inform your OCPs or are being informed by your OCPs, that we're seeing the same thing and that we're using the same language and the same assumptions. We're also going through the Regional Administrators Advisory Committee at Metro Vancouver and informing them of where we're at too, so to make sure that we're trying to be in lockstep. As well as consultations between the chair of the Mayor's Council, the chair of Metro Board, and the minister, so that we're trying to make sure all these things are singing from the same song sheet. And hopefully we're getting there. Then we will go out in consultation this summer, fall with Metro when they engage municipal councils. We're going to do some of that aligned and coordinated, so you can see how the two strategies are actually developing and get input from the municipal councils at that time. On Mayor Cote's request for how will this come together. So right now we've got a couple of options, sort of concepts for the network and all the other strategies that we're bringing forward. We will work with you after we hear from the public in June to really be coming forward and try and nail down what the overall draft strategy is. And part of that work will be understanding both from the policy imperatives, the big moves that are there, as well as the network pieces, what elements will show up probably in the first 15 years and what would be in the latter 15 years of that. That would quickly this fall transition into updating the mayor's 10-year vision with the goal of finishing that next spring. And the mayor's 10-year vision, as opposed to Transport 2050, needs to identify what those priorities are, what the studies, what the investments would vision, which will build, as Mayor Cote said, from the previous vision, and then what are the new priorities coming out of Transport 2050, and how do you sequence them?
Okay, thank you. Mayor Dingwall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I originally raised my hand, and I will go back to it on a point that Andrew had raised, but I thought I would chime in on Mayor Brody's comments. And I do agree with Mayor Brody, and I've voiced this concern in the past on a good number of occasions. Ridership data and gaps are important factors and metrics for us to look at when we're looking at capital priority setting for the future. But the reality is that it mainly affects and benefits larger cities, and it is actually contrary to considerations around regional equity and also our vision and our concept, and it's a fairly new one that talks about 15-minute communities. And so if we continue to build SkyTrain with a destination of the end of the line, then the rest of the region, we're not driving the 15-minute community concept and trying to keep people working and living close to home. And so again, I think this is going to be a significant issue for our forum to wrestle to the ground and make sure issues around regional equity are considered. The second thing, though, and this is really for Andrew, and I was watching the slides, in particular page 26, and on page 26, the first thing that really caught my attention was when you mentioned SkyTrain Technologies is 5 times more costly than at-grade technology. And when I look at the actual chart, if you read it and somebody digests it and understands that there's another 200 kilometers of at-grade, and for the overall system, they'll cost about the same. But you really have to put your mind to that. Whereas when you mentioned 5 times as expensive, I think that is such an important factor that it should have been, bolded in the communication, because that is one that I think our citizens would pay attention to. They would look at it and then look at return on investment. And if they understood the goal of a 15-minute community, I think a lot of them would likely go to a different scenario than SkyTrain technology. So again, just a comment around the 5 times more expensive, and is there the ability to get that in even as talking points when we're engaging with the community?
Chair, if I may, just one thing on the first part of Mayor Dingwall's point, and it actually gets back to the UBC extension as well. So we are consulting on what the objectives and the strategy are for this overall strategy, and per your points, when we come back, we'll be looking at ridership, but we'll also be looking at all those other metrics that you identified, including sort of the equity of that, who's benefiting, the access to employment and other services. That will be part of what we look at the different network options and for the strategies. And we've been very clear in the UBC extension engagement that that will feed into the refresh of both the Transport 2050 and Mayor's vision for prioritization by this body. So it won't just be singly ridership, to your point. It's what else does it do in pursuing those objectives? Sorry, Andrew, I cut you off.
And just, Mr. Chair, on that point, if I might, thanks, Jeff, for that. And I know in particular, you are pushing the various points of view and trying to have that balanced approach. And it really does boil down to, do we continue on with trends in the past, which is a east-west commuter pattern, or do we look at diversifying throughout the Metro Vancouver area in the next 50, 100 years? So Again, I know have been very supportive of looking at balance and bringing those perspectives to the table. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move along on the speaking list. Director McCutcheon.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I did have a question for Andrew. He started, but he didn't conclude.
Apologize. Didn't mean to cut you off, Andrew.
You know, that's okay. Really, just to acknowledge, thanks, Mayor Dingwall, for articulating those trade-offs really well. We're doing our best. This is actually a somewhat difficult to communicate clearly. So every time we have a public session or a stakeholder meeting, we are trying to refine that messaging. So yeah, we absolutely are trying to highlight that stat that you just mentioned around the cost differential to highlight some of the key trade-offs here. So yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Director McCutcheon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just on, we all know that all of these massive projects take years, even decades to get to the finish line. And that in that process, there are a number of stages. And for the UBC extension, my understanding, well, we have as the Mayor's Council approved, and it is already well underway, the pre-business case. And my understanding is that this part of the engagement is part of that. And I think it would be a real missed opportunity if we were to stop that process in the middle of what is a fairly standard part of our TransLink staff's process in terms of getting the data that we need to make these big decisions. To me, it's not an or, it's an and, not an or. We can't be, I'm in full support of rapid bus. In fact, I kind of wish we could do that entirely across the region, but I think we have to be looking at the data on all of these projects and what makes the most sense. Mayor Dingwall, I fully agree with you on the equity piece. I just want to add in, though, there's also an environmental piece to this, and we need to be thinking about, part of the data are greenhouse gas emissions. And if we have people transported from Langley, from Maple Ridge out to UBC, the fact is we can't put UBC in Maple Ridge. It is where it is. From an environmental perspective, frankly, it's not the best place for it to be, right on the edge of the peninsula, but that's a fact. And I hope we can all just wear a regional hat when we're thinking about this and look at all of these factors, the equity, the greenhouse gas emissions, the data on ridership, and put all these pieces together and not be so anti sort of one piece of this until we get the data on this. I have sat in on a couple of meetings actually where TransLink staff have been presenting about their plans specifically for the engagement period piece of the pre-business case around the UBC extension. And I can say that what Mr. Cross has described is absolutely true. I was really listening carefully for the language that was used around this, and it absolutely was described in context of the broader Transport 2050 and getting this high level input that will be taken along with all of the other bits of information that we're collecting at this time. But I think it would be a real missed opportunity if we were to throw out this the rest of the pre-business case in case the public thought that this was going to go ahead. I mean, this is a part of all of our major projects, and I assume that in the future, if we're looking at extensions to the North Shore or other areas of the region, we would do the same thing. We would go through the same data collection, the same kind of public engagement.
Thank you, Director McCutcheon. Mayor McCallum.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I've spoken a lot on this over the last little while, and I have to say, I'm not sure there's been many changes and a lot of comments that have come at least from south of the Fraser. I share Mayor Brody's comments. I think we're misleading the public by doing this out here at this time. To try to do planning in this region for 50 years, in my belief, is absolutely impossible. The changes that are happening in this region, even this week, if not 50 years out, is astonishing when the figures come out. Where the growth is going in this region, in a big way is south of the Fraser. The figures will show that when they come forward in the next few months or years. And I think the planning process is trying to split our whole region by doing a network A and a network B, for example. That it just leads to splitting our region and having different parts of our region be upset with the other one. Our planning process should have been putting one suggested item out there, which would be a combination of A and B. That's what planning's about, is working out a combination one to the public to see how the public fits it, not giving it out and deciding on option A and option B. And that will only lead to big arguments down the road in Metro Vancouver. Because we need to deal with the growth figures. And I can tell you, because I'm part of that growth figures, is that the growth is astonishing where it's happening right now. TransLink also with their figures, just on the comeback of ridership, can see where the growth is because it's south of the Fraser, and the lines that run south of the Fraser are the ones that have a lot higher ridership coming out of COVID-19. And so I do share Mayor Brody's comments that we are putting a false hope out to the public for a whole number of reasons. And I am certainly concerned with that, because I think we're going to end up in splitting this region, and then we end up with different parts of it wanting this and wanting that. We already see that in some of the bigger parts of our communities now. We should have just put one suggested item out and let the public give some other ideas, rather than forcing it upon the public to just about choose between two networks. That's not the way to do public consulting. So anyways, I have some real concerns with the direction that is going, as a number, I think, of mayors have in this region.
Okay, well, I appreciate those comments. I think, as we've discussed before, and as is being discussed in the public, this isn't an option A or option B in terms of the future network design. Those are kind of bookends that are put out for a conversation. But I actually will stand behind actually having a real and genuine conversation and putting out multiple options in different directions to the public to engage. Ultimately, we're going to land somewhere in the middle, but I think the public feedback should help shape that, and so should this body help shape that discussion. So we'll move along on the speaking list. Councillor Cameron.
Yeah, I have to respectfully disagree with Mayor McCallum. I think that the intention of this consultation, as I understand it, is to provide the public with two poles. You can have an extensive or you can have an intensive system, and each of them have trade-offs. And what I think most people who read it will take is that we're not asking to pick between one or the other, but we're going to end up with some form of hybrid of the two. And what the intention is, I understand, is to tease out the public's reaction to either extremes and what they like and what they value and what they don't value. So I have faith that TransLink will take this and be able to digest the information received and craft exactly the sort of proposed plan that Mayor McCallum is referring to, which will then be the one that we end up voting on. So I think that we need to show that the dichotomy and the trade-offs. I think that's how you get a discussion going in let's say we were in a court. You present either side, and then the public can, or the decision maker can choose. You don't just give one perspective. So I support this approach. I think it's an intelligent approach. It requires some engagement by the public. But I don't think it's too much to ask. And I don't think there will be a great deal of people who are misled. I will not repeat what Mayor Dingwall and Director McCutcheon said, but I agree 100% with what each of them have said. And I'll just offer two thoughts. I don't think it's too early to be discussing future plans. This isn't a 50-year plan, as Mayor McCallum said. This is actually really a 29-year plan. It's Transport 2050. We're already in 2021. We know that big improvements in the transit system in this region take decades. The Evergreen Line, I don't know exactly what the timeline was, but it was way too long. I think we can all agree on that. The sooner we start talking about the overall plan and start sketching out things, the better. And the more aggressive we can be in building these out, the better. Of course, things may change and everything's evolving, and we can pivot. I mean, Mayor McCallum demonstrated how fast one can pivot from one plan to the other if circumstances and exigencies change. But you have to start planning. You have to start every journey, no matter how long, with the first steps. And my second point is, and I know this from personal experience in West Vancouver, I still bear the scars, is this consultation about taking away road space in favor of transit is, one must be, I just say this to staff and for the consideration of my colleagues, it's very easy to say in the abstract, well, do you support, transit if it means taking away road space? In the abstract and stated generally, it's relatively palatable to people. Where it becomes challenging is when it actually becomes down to which roads, how much road space, and how's it going to affect particular people. So all I would say to TransLink staff and to my colleagues is, and Mayor West would agree with this point, is we better make sure that the participating municipalities and the councils on those municipalities are willing to support this reallocation of road space, because while we might think it's the right thing to do conceptually, and we might want to create 15-minute cities, there's going to be, in some cases, considerable backlash, and we have to have local government support in those areas to get it through, and we have to craft it carefully so that people see the benefits in those communities. Obviously, it did not go the way we wanted it to go in West Van, and hopefully it would be different otherwise. But I guess the point is, consulting conceptually at a high level is fine, but you use a cliche, where the rubber hits the road is where the road is reallocated.
Okay. Thank you for those comments, Councillor Cameron. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks, and I know this is a discussion that's happened many times over, so I won't prolong it too long, but just wanted to agree with and reiterate the points that Director McCutcheon made about the UBC extension, that we know it really is a regional project that is serving residents across the region. It's not just a Vancouver project, and a lot of those residents don't currently have the option of a 15-minute community and a 15-minute commute. They are traveling long distances, and this is a project that will serve all of those residents. So again, don't need to prolong that, but I do think there are important equity elements to that that aren't just about the specifics of the project being located on the UBC Vancouver Peninsula, and also will echo an appreciation for the framing of these two options as sort of the two ends of a spectrum rather than a binary to choose from. That's certainly how I have been interpreting this, and in listening to folks speak, if that isn't clear, maybe that's a useful piece of feedback in how they're being framed to the public, because I think we can all understand that the richness and the decisions are going to lie somewhere in between these two options and the specifics of where one works versus the other. So I think that might be a helpful point of feedback. That's certainly how we have been interpreting, how I've been interpreting the two options laid out there on a kind of poll. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate everyone's comments. It's encouraging to see with our delegation and also the Mayor's Council engaging in Transport 2050, and certainly hope the general public also can take the opportunity to participate, over the next little while to further engage and help inform. No doubt the results and work coming out of this public engagement will find its way back to this table, but now's the opportunity for that broader community and stakeholder engagement. So this was a report for information. If I can get a motion to receive.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And that brings us to the end of our open public meeting. If I can get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, so we'll take a short 5-minute break and resume.